Today, I want to tell you a story. It's one that isn't taught in schools and many people have never even heard of. It's the story of when the Nazis tried to infiltrate America and how the Mafia, of all people, stopped them.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is WRNY Radio, bringing you a special report from New York. There is growing concern among citizens, where reports have emerged of radical uniformed Nazis assembling and parading openly through the street of New York. Observers describe something needs to be done about the Nazi problem in America. They are fascists, and the cops turn a blind eye. Somebody, somewhere, needs to put a stop to them.
For the first time ever, the script is flipped, and in this story, the gangsters are actually the good guys. It starts in Germany, 1938. A storm is brewing. Adolf Hitler has already taken Austria. Kristallnacht is only months away. The Nazi war machine is growing stronger by the day. He's silenced opponents, begun rearming the country, and now looks outward to Czechoslovakia, to Poland, to France, and eventually to America. Whilst the Nazis were prospering, America had just clawed its way out of nearly a decade of the Great Depression. People were broke, angry, and desperate for someone to blame, and that's exactly what the Nazis fed on. They pointed the finger at the Jews, claiming that they were communists, that they controlled the banks, that they hoarded the wealth while everyone else starved, and were the main reason that the Great Depression happened. It really was the oldest trick in the book. Find a scapegoat, light the match, and watch the hatred spread. And out of that hatred, the German-American Bund was born in 1936. It was a pro-Nazi organisation whose main goal was to spread Hitler's ideology on American soil. By this point, for nearly 2 years, they'd been holding public rallies, spewing anti-Semitic propaganda in parks, community halls, and arenas. There were no hate speech laws back then, so nothing stopping them from saying exactly what they thought, that Jews were the problem and that they had a solution. This wasn't happening in secret. This took place in Yorkville, Manhattan's German neighbourhood, a place so heavily populated with German immigrants back in the 30s that it earned the nickname of Sauerkraut Boulevard. And Nazis were marching right down the streets of New York City, swastika banners flying alongside American flags like it was normal. Tens of thousands of Nazi sympathisers came out to cheer them on, and I cannot believe this isn't taught in school. We did World War II in school for maybe 2, 3, 4 years every single day, and we were never taught this, and I find it absolutely crazy. But by 1938, there was somewhere between 50 and 100,000 Nazis in the United States. They didn't just want followers to join them, they wanted soldiers. So they targeted the youth, hosting indoctrination camps in places like Camp Nordland in New Jersey. And on the surface, they looked just like summer retreats, but inside, children were being taught to worship Hitler, chant Sieg Heil, and believe that Jews were the enemy. These weren't just kids' camps, they were training grounds and Aryan brotherhoods. They modelled themselves after the Hitler Youth and called themselves the Brown Shirts, mimicking the original SS stormtroopers from Germany. They claimed that they were the future of America, that real patriotism meant rooting out the Jews and making the country pure again. They said they were going to make America great by turning it into a mirror of Nazi Germany. And in the same year that Jewish families across Europe are being rounded up, transported to concentration camps, and branded as enemies of the Reich, America hosts a rally that would make Joseph Goebbels himself the proudest man in America. February the 20th, 1939, Madison Square Gardens, just a few blocks from Times Square. 20,000 members of the German-American Bund stand and cheer under a 30-foot banner of George Washington, flanked by two massive red and black Nazi swastikas. Outside, 100,000 protesters try to break through the barricades. Mounted police, billy clubs drawn, push them back. On stage, an orchestra plays Star-Spangled Banner, followed immediately by the Horst Wessel Lied, the Nazi anthem. Make no mistake, this was a full-blown Nazi rally, right in the heart of New York City. Just unbelievable. So at the podium is Fritz Kuhn. So he was the leader of the Bund and known as the American Führer. So he once worked for Henry Ford and he joined the Nazi Party back in Germany before moving to the US in 1928 and becoming a citizen. So this was all part of Hitler's plan. He wanted to place Kuhn in the US and basically infiltrate. So at this point, he now calls for a white Christian America, free from what he calls Jewish Bolshevism and Semitic influence. His accent is thick, his anger is thicker. This is not just a rally, he tells the crowd. This is a message, a declaration that the spirit of Adolf Hitler lives in the heart of American patriots. I mean, can you believe this? The message is heard, but not in the way that he wants, because out in the boroughs, in Bronx pool halls, Brooklyn card games and Lower East Side synagogues, there are men who've also heard his message loud and clear, and they're not going to let it stand. One of those men is Nathan Perlman, and the absolute hero of our story. Perlman was a Polish-born Jew, a US congressman and a respected judge. So he wasn't just another face in the crowd, he was a key figure in the repeal of Prohibition and one of the most respected legal minds in New York. A true political heavyweight, and by this point, he was sick to death of the Nazis. Since the formation of the Bund in 1936, he had tried to fight the Nazis the proper way, through the courts, through the legal system. He believed in the law, he believed in America, but the law wasn't stopping the Bund, and he knew this. He saw the rallies, he heard the speeches, he watched as Nazi flags were flown in American streets, with the police standing by on both sides of the street doing absolutely nothing. And like I say, he was sick to death of them. One evening, Perlman attended what was supposed to be a patriotic event in Manhattan, a gathering to celebrate American ideals and everything American, but it didn't go to plan. The German-American Bund showed up uninvited, waving signs, chanting slogans, and turning the event into chaos. The crowd was drowned out and the whole thing was forced indoors. They were all crammed into a nearby bar and literally barricaded in by the German-American Bund. So the now called Land of the Free now felt like a hunted minority gathering in secret. And for Nathan Perlman, this really was the last straw. He realised something chilling. If the Nazis couldn't be stopped by the law, then maybe it was time to stop them by other means. Nathan had a few beers in the bar that he was now currently forced into by the Bund, something he could thank himself for, having been instrumental in getting rid of the 18th Amendment, or Prohibition as it's more widely recognised, and realised that if the law wasn't going to stop the Nazis, then he'd have to handle it what you'd call the old-fashioned way. So he picked up the phone and he called Meyer Lansky, the king of the Jewish gangsters. He really was the absolute creme de la creme of Jewish gangsters. By 1938, Lansky was one of the most powerful mobsters in America. He's not flashy, he doesn't like the cameras, but everyone in the underworld knows him. He'd come to the US as a poor Jewish immigrant from a place called Grodno, a very, very small town in Belarus, and grew up on the tough streets of Manhattan's Lower East Side. He'd made his bones running numbers and bootlegging whiskey with his lifelong friends Bugsy Siegel and Lucky Luciano, probably the most powerful gangster in America. But it was Lansky's mind that made him rise. So Lansky was very sharp, he was very patient and very, very calculating. He was the main instigator really who brokered the peace in the underworld in the early 1930s after all hell was let loose after the Castellamarese War. And he was the one who, alongside his best friend Lucky Luciano, designed the structure of the modern American Mafia with a national syndicate, a board of directors, and a team of killers on retainer. And that team of killers is what he suggested when Nathan Pearlman called. Nathan Pearlman was no stranger to Meyer Lansky. During Prohibition, Pearlman had been a drinker, Lansky a bootlegger, so naturally their paths had crossed enough times to build a connection. "Do you have any boys that punched Nazis?" Pearlman asked. Lansky, who was always ready to do a favour for a judge, replied in the most gangster way ever. He said, "Yeah, sure, but we can do a lot better than punch. You know my boys are known as Murder Inc." And Pearlman quickly cut him off. No, he said. So first of all, Rabbi Wise, who was the main rabbi in the city, wouldn't approve of that. He said, "If we start killing Nazis, we lose the moral high ground. Just let them know," he said, "that Jews can be tough and fight back." Lansky had emigrated from Europe as a child, and unlike most Americans who at this time simply weren't aware, he was seeing what Hitler was doing to Jews in Europe, and now in the country that Lansky now called home, fascism was marching in the open under police protection with permits and microphones and lawyers behind them, and he was more than happy to offer a helping hand for free despite Pearlman offering to pay for his services. He told Pearlman that it was a Jewish fight and he didn't want any money. So the first thing that Lansky did was he went straight to Louis Lepke Buchalter, who was the ruthless head of Murder Inc. and someone who was under Luciano and Lansky's control. So Lepke controlled all the Jewish hitmen in Murder Inc., whilst the much feared Albert Anastasia controlled the Italians. At this point, Anastasia did offer the Italian members of Murder Inc. to go down and fight with the Jewish side of them, but Lansky refused, telling him again that it was a Jewish fight. So Lepke Buchalter wasted absolutely no time in assigning some of his most deadliest men to the fight. These really were cold-blooded killers. So first he was Abe Kid Twist Relis, named after his favourite way to kill, which was wringing a guy's neck. Next he was Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss. Strauss was apparently a terrible gambler, hence his nickname, but he was also someone who was suspected in over 500 murders. 500 murders. Charles the Bug Workman was next. So he was called the Bug because he was basically crazy as a bedbug, and he was also a man who proudly carried 20 notches on his pistol, meaning that he'd successfully carried out 20 hits for Murder Inc. Finally, there was Bugsy Goldstein. Now, he was another one who was called Bugsy because he was crazy as a bedbug, and these guys really were cold-blooded killers. They were the perfect choice to form a team of Nazi hunters. Charles Workman was known for his cold precision. Each of his 20 hits for Murder Inc. targeted the right man, and he never killed the wrong person, which was an absolute rarity in his line of work during the 1920s and 30s, whilst Bugsy Goldstein had a habit of cracking one-liners right before killing. It's sinister, but it is slightly amusing. So he'd do things like, "You need me like a hole in the head, don't you?" before literally putting a bullet in a guy's head. I mean, just, what can you say? Absolutely outrageous. So these guys' headquarters was Midnight Roses. That was a candy store in Brownsville, Brooklyn, where they hung out in the back waiting for the phone to ring. Sometimes it was a call from the commission, the governing body of the American Mafia that coordinated and approved hits across families. That was made up of folk like Lansky, Lucky Luciano, Bugsy Siegel, and they'd be giving them a green light to carry out a murder. Other times it was a call to now break up a Nazi rally. So between calls they ate bagels, drank coffee and played cards, ready to move at a moment's notice. The candy store was run by Rosie Gold, who herself was a larger than life character. She managed a numbers racket right from the shop window downstairs, and no photos have survived of Rosie, but by all accounts she also ran a brothel above the candy store, acting as a madam for the women who worked for her. Rosie was tough as nails and just as no nonsense as any of the men who were lingering downstairs. She kept Midnight Roses humming, and it was a perfect front for Murder Inc.'s darker business. So, on the evening of April the 20th, 1938, on Hitler's 49th birthday, the phone finally rang at Midnight Roses. The boys put down their cards, stubbed out their smokes, and picked up the call. The first official Nazi hunting assignment had come in. The German-American Bund was throwing a full-blown celebration in Hitler's honour at the Yorkville Casino on East 86th Street in Yorkville, the centre of their operations. So the Yorkville Casino wasn't just a venue, it was kind of like a cultural hub for New York's German immigrant community. It was a place where people could eat schnitzel, drink Bavarian beer and listen to polka music that reminded them of the old country. But that night it would become the site of something else entirely. So the Bund had planned to deck it out with swastikas and American flags side by side. It was meant to look patriotic, but it was a farce. In reality, this was a full-blown Nazi rally, an open declaration that Hitler's ideology was growing right in the heart of New York City. Really scary stuff if you think about it. So the Murder Inc. boys wasted no time. They stormed the celebration, and Meyer Lansky himself actually turned up for this one. What followed was nothing short of absolute bedlam. 60 of Murder Inc.'s toughest Jewish gangsters waded into a sea of roughly 1,000 Bund members. What erupted was a full-on street war that would later be remembered as the Battle of Yorkville Casino. Chairs were broken, noses were shattered, and banners bearing Hitler's face were ripped to pieces. During the chaos, Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel threw a Nazi clean out of a second-story window. By pure luck, the guy landed on his feet, breaking his leg instead of cracking his skull. Had he come down on his head, he would have been killed. The no-killing line that Nathan Perlman had set had almost been crossed just minutes into their first mission. The Bund had never seen anything like this. They were used to marching unopposed, to shouting their hatred in peace, and now they were bleeding, literally. And they were stunned by the idea that the very people they'd been demonising, Jews, were the ones that were now putting them in hospital. This night really did mark a turning point. The Bund wasn't just rattled, it was humiliated. Word spread quickly through the city's underworld and immigrant communities. Jewish gangsters had taken on the American Nazis in their own backyard of Yorkville and won. After what became known as the Battle of Yorkville Casino, the message had been sent loud and clear. 7 Nazis ended up in hospital beds, and the political fallout was immediate. So the mayor of New York City at the time was a man called Fiorello LaGuardia, and he was no friend of fascism. He clamped down hard. He banned the Nazi uniforms. He made it nearly impossible for them to get permits for rallies, and he effectively shut down their public presence in Manhattan. For the time being, New York City was no longer a safe haven for Nazis. So the Nazis naturally packed up and they crossed the river into New Jersey. There, in places like Newark and Irvington, they reorganised. They formed what they called the Brown Shirts, mimicking the SA stormtroopers in Germany. These weren't just loudmouths with signs anymore. They were training in Aryan Brotherhood compounds, marching in formation and gearing up like a real army. They needed someone and something to fight back against the Jewish gangsters. They began stockpiling ammunition and weapons, which was financed by Hitler himself, and they started buying planes all over the country and transporting them to New Jersey. They were attempting to create their kind of own mini Luftwaffe, if you like, within America, and New Jersey was fast becoming the new front for the American Nazi movement. Judge Nathan Perlman, watching this unfold, wasn't about to let it slide, so he picked up the phone once more and called another name from his phone book and another man from the world of organised crime. This time it was Abner Longy Zwillman. So Zwillman was the undisputed boss of Jewish gangsters in New Jersey, and when Perlman asked if he had any men who might want to punch Nazis just like he had with Lansky's, Zwillman didn't hesitate. Zwillman was a man of few words, and all he said was, "Yeah, I've got plenty." He put one of his best men at the top of the job, so a man called Nat Arno. He was a recently retired professional boxer with fists like concrete and a serious hatred for fascism. Arno was put in charge of forming a full-blown anti-Nazi militia. They called themselves the New Jersey Minutemen, a nod to the fighters of the original Minutemen who'd been ready to defend their land at a moment's notice during the American Revolution. And just like their namesakes, these guys weren't waiting for orders, they were always ready to fight. At its peak, the New Jersey Minutemen had over 1,000 members, which was a huge organisation. It really was the largest organised anti-Nazi force in America. They weren't just tough either, they were trained. Beside Nat Arno stood his second in command, Abby Bain, another hard-hitting ex-boxer who once fought heavyweight contender 2-ton Tony Galento, the same Galento who'd gone toe-to-toe with Joe Louis. If Bain could take a punch from Galento, then you could bet your bottom dollar he could take a swing at a fascist and come out smiling. Next, there was a man called Max Puddy Hinkes. He was currently a pro fighter, and he was another tough Jewish guy who traded the ring for the street. He didn't want money, he didn't need fame. Puddy punched Nazis for free. The Minutemen stormed every single Nazi rally they could find across New Jersey, from Newark to Union City to Camden. They didn't ask for payment, they didn't do it for publicity. They did it because it needed to be done. Every time the brown shirts held a public event, the Minutemen were there to crash it, fists flying, banners ripped, hatred stomped in the dirt. And eventually, the Nazis got the message. New Jersey wasn't safe for them either. They were being outnumbered and outpunched. So they moved on. The Bund shifted its focus elsewhere, you could say, but the legend of the Jewish Minutemen remained. Regular guys who stood up, laced their boots, and fought back when it mattered most. The Bund tried to regroup in Chicago, but by now, the rallies were becoming a losing game. Too many fists, too many broken noses, and too many Nazis running home scared. So they took their movement underground, ditching parades and podiums in favour of secrecy and shadows. But the fight didn't end there, it just changed tactics. Enter a man called Herb Brin. Brin wasn't a gangster, he wasn't a politician, he was a young Jewish poet, a journalist, and a very proud member of the Anti-Defamation League. So what made him perfect for the job was that he looked the part. He was clean cut, fair skinned, and he could pass as a good little Aryan. He volunteered to infiltrate the Nazi underground in Chicago. His mission? To pretend to be one of them, find out where the meetings were happening, and report back. Now Herb didn't do this alone, he had backup. Judge Perlman picked up the phone once more, and this time he called a man called Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik. He was the long-time second in command to Al Capone, and behind Meyer Lansky, probably the most powerful Jewish gangster on American soil. So Guzik was kind of the accountant of the mob. He was quiet. He was also calculating, quite like Lansky in that regard, and he was very, very devout in his faith. He had absolutely no intention of letting Nazis gain a foothold in his city. Guzik had gone down for tax evasion like his boss, but he'd gotten a shorter sentence. He brought the idea to Capone, who was still behind bars in 1939, and Capone basically gave him the red light. He said on the phone, well, yeah, we don't want Nazis in Chicago either. So Greasy Thumb got to work assembling an anti-fascist crew of his own. Herb Bryn became his man on the inside, and every single time that Bryn uncovered the time and place of a secret Bund meeting, he passed it straight to Guzik, and those meetings were stormed. So Guzik's unofficial headquarters was a restaurant he owned called the St. Hubert's Old English Grill, and that was located at 314 Kedzie Avenue in Chicago. Next door to the grill at 316 was a Jewish boxing gym which was run by a man called Davy Miller. So Davy Miller was a Jewish boxing referee who was chosen for heavyweight fights most of the time because, well, he could keep the fighters at bay. He wasn't afraid to throw a punch himself, and that gym that he ran effectively became kind of like a training ground for Chicago's own army of anti-Nazi brawlers. Fighters like Barney Ross, who was a champion in 3 weight classes, a US Marine, and a proud Jew, hailed from that gym. Ross hated Nazis with every single fibre of his being, but he was so concerned and worried that when the brawling started, he might actually kill one of them. They handed him a blackjack instead and told him to go to the head, so it was just enough to cause damage and send a message, but not enough for a murder charge. So alongside Barney Ross was his best friend, Jacob Sparky Rubenstein. He wasn't a boxer, he was a hot-headed, small-time gangster who ran a couple of rackets across Chicago for the Chicago outfit. He was loosely sort of associated with the outfit, and at this point he was just another Jew who wanted in on the fight. An interesting thing about Rubenstein is that history remembers him by another name, Jack Ruby. The same Jack Ruby who would one day walk up to Lee Harvey Oswald on national television and shoot him dead. But in the late 1930s, Rubenstein was just another brawler busting up Nazi meetings for free. Between Herb Bryn's infiltration and the muscle upstairs at the gym, the Chicago Nazi scene was a mess. Every meeting turned into a street brawl, every rally ended with sirens and stretchers, and after a while, the Bund realised they couldn't get a foothold in Chicago either. One city after another, they were being run out of town by regular working class Jews. Poets, boxers, gangsters, they all stood up and they all said, no, not here. And just like that, the Nazis went looking for another safe haven. The Nazis tried their luck elsewhere, but their biggest weapon now wasn't fists or flags, it was a voice. In 1939, the loudest and most dangerous voice in American anti-Semitism didn't belong to a thug or a politician. It belonged to a Catholic priest, Father Charles Coughlin. I mean, you just think that he'd know better, wouldn't you? Preaching the gospel, preaching the Bible, and preaching anti-Semitism. Coughlin had a syndicated radio show, meaning that his broadcasts weren't just local. This meant that they were aired coast to coast, picked up by stations across the country. Basically, his reach was huge. At the height of his fame, nearly 30 million Americans tuned in every week. That's a quarter of the 120 million population of America at this time. And worryingly, they were hanging on to every single word, and every single word was poison. Coughlin praised Hitler, he railed against Jewish bankers, and he promoted fascist ideas dressed up as patriotism. He was close personal friends with Fritz Kuhn, the head of the German-American Bund, and he used his radio show to introduce Nazi ideology to mainstream American households. which is just ludicrous, and I know I keep saying it throughout the video, but you can't believe this happened. His rhetoric was so extreme that at one point the Chicago outfit itself, or at least members of it, considered silencing him permanently. I think Greasy Thumb Guzik was the main instigator behind this, but cooler heads in the outfit prevailed, and they feared that killing such a famed Catholic priest would bring too much heat on their operations, and they opted against it. Now, the Nazis against the gangsters really was becoming the little domestic war before, well, what was to become the bloodiest war in history, and it was spreading west. Thanks to Coughlin's influence, the Nazi presence began to grow in Los Angeles. Los Angeles in the 30s was a city filled with German expats, political refugees, and a powerful film industry that made it a prime target for fascist propaganda. Once again, Nathan Perlman picked up his phone. This time he called Mickey Cohen, an absolute tough-as-nails Jewish gangster who ran the West Coast underworld. Now, Mickey didn't need much convincing, put it that way. He absolutely hated Nazis to the core, and he was more than happy to join the cause. So at the same time, Mylans reached out to his friend Bugsy Siegel to keep watch over LA with Mickey Cohen and give Cohen a bit of a helping hand. So at this point, Bugsy Siegel had moved west to LA. Bugsy was as close to a Hollywood gangster as they come, really. He was handsome, stylish, and just absolutely deadly. He was one of Lansky's closest friends and a trusted lieutenant of Lucky Luciano. With Bugsy and Cohen working together, Los Angeles was completely protected. The streets may have been glitzy, but behind the scenes, fists and bullets were ready if needed. But LA wasn't the only front in this underground war. Another powerful voice for fascism was rising in Minnesota. A man named William Dudley Pelley. So he was once a respected screenwriter in Hollywood. Then he claimed that he had a near-death experience where God supposedly spared him, sent him back to Earth, and told him to spread the word of the glorious Adolf Hitler. He left the movie business behind and founded something called the Silver Legion of America, which was better known as the Silver Shirts. This was a uniformed fascist militia inspired by the German American Buns brown shirts. So Pelley's Silver Shirts started staging rallies in the Twin Cities, St. Paul and Minneapolis, and the movement began to pick up steam. That's when Perlman made another call. This time, he opted to call a man called Davy Berman. His nickname was the Jew, and he was a hardened gangster with deep roots in Minneapolis. Davy had faced anti-Semitism all his life, and he wasn't about to let Nazis take the city he ruled with an iron fist. So he put together his own crew of street enforcers. These were men who didn't need money or glory. They just wanted to smash up Nazi meetings and Nazi heads and send a message. And they did. Rally after rally, they stormed in, broke bones and scattered fascists like rats. Everywhere the Bund tried to crawl, there was a Jewish crew ready to crush them. City by city, state by state, the Nazis were chased underground, not by the government or the press, but by bakers and boxers, ex-champions, who were all united under a simple principle, and one principle alone: no Nazis, not here. Desperate to reclaim control of the movement, Fritz Kuhn made one last gamble. The Bund was losing, the gangsters were winning. The rallies were falling apart, the public was turning, and the underground war was spreading. So Kuhn decided to go big. Bigger than anything the Nazis had ever tried before. He booked Madison Square Garden. It was February the 20th, 1939. The rally was marketed as a pro-America gathering, but it was a full-blown Nazi spectacle. It really was. Kuhn shipped in Bund members from across the country. Hotels were filled. Over 20,000 Nazis packed the arena. Giant banners of George Washington were hung beside swastikas in a familiar attempt to mask fascism as patriotism. Speeches were planned from the most prominent Nazi voices in America, men like Charles Coughlin, William Pelley, and of course Fritz Kuhn. But outside, there was 100,000 protesters. Jews, veterans, labour unions, regular New Yorkers, who were all drawn to the streets by the very anti-fascist momentum that our hero Nathan Perlman had helped ignite. People were waking up. They'd seen how Hitler had treated the Jews in Europe and they didn't want it here. The NYPD, they were practically useless. They were afraid of an all-out riot, so they locked down the entrances to Madison Square Garden. Protesters were kept outside, the Nazis were kept in. But one man slipped through the cracks, and his name was Izzy Greenbaum. So he was an unemployed Jewish plumber, and he snuck into Madison Square Garden that night. He sat quietly, he waited and watched, and then at the height of the evening, when Fritz Kuhn took to the stage and began his speech, Izzy made his move. So as we can see from this footage of the evening, Izzy rushed the platform, he yanked the microphone cord out, and he shouted, although we can't hear it, "Hitler has only got one ball." The crowd froze, then chaos erupted. The Nazis stormed the stage, fists flying. Security tackled Izzy, but before the Nazi mob could beat him to death, NYPD officers dragged him out of the arena. Outside, he was met with cheers. Protesters swarmed around him like he was a champion. Even some of the cops were reportedly smiling, as you can see. Not all of New York's finest was sympathetic to the Bund, so naturally Izzy was hauled off to jail, but the very next morning the courtroom was packed. Dozens of Jewish New Yorkers showed up to post his bail. To them, he was a hero. And the front pages of the newspapers that morning that the Bund had hoped would celebrate their night was all dominated by Izzy Greenbaum and his act of defiance. When Izzy returned home, a gift basket of $20,000 was waiting for him, courtesy of Meyer Lansky. Next came Pearl Harbor. So the attack on December the 7th, 1941 changed everything. 2,400 American servicemen and women were killed by a surprise attack from the Japanese Navy. America declared war on Japan, and thus Germany declared war on America. The fight moved overseas. Murder Inc. went back to their day jobs, back to their business. But members of the Minutemen, guys like Nat Arno and patriots like Izzy Greenbaum, they enlisted to fight. Nat Arno would actually go on to storm the beaches of Normandy, fight through Europe, and help liberate Berlin. When he got home, he told a story where he recalled seeing German prisoners of war, American Nazis, who had recognised him. These were men who had once faced him in the streets of Newark, and now they were defeated in their homeland. I believe that the underground war against the Nazis in America was more than just bar fights and backroom deals, which is kind of what it's been remembered as, really. It was absolutely critical. It was an early blow to fascism before most Americans, before Mr. and Mrs. America even knew that fascism was coming. Without the gangsters, the boxers, the bakers, plumbers like Izzy Greenbaum, the Nazi presence in the US may have grown far, far deeper, and if they had managed to build their own mini Luftwaffe, and a Nazi army within America as they planned, the outcome of World War II could have been much different. For once, the gangsters were the good guys in this story, without glorifying, but crucially, for the Allies, the gangsters won this war. Listen, thanks so much for watching. I know this is a little different, this video, compared to my longer sort of 2-hour documentaries, but did you enjoy it? I do tend to go down rabbit holes like this story, and I just have this thing inside me that makes me want to create a video about it. So please let me know if you enjoyed it. Let me know if there's any other little stories that you want me to cover as well. If you did enjoy it, please do like the video and subscribe. It boosts the channel so much. If you really enjoyed it, you can become a channel member, where you'll receive more content like this, access to our private Discord, and much more. So yeah, please let me know if there's any other stories like this that you'd like me to cover. I had great fun making this video. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.